Welcome to the beginner lesson of the well-tuned introduction. Most young writers, when they set about writing a formal academic essay, underestimate the power of an excellent introduction. I think their thinking is, why bother with a whole bunch of introductory matter when you can just get right to your point? But this is to overlook some of the things that an introduction can do to make an essay really outstanding. First and foremost, the introduction is the first impression that your reading audience is going to get of you. This is where you prove your mettle as a writer and build your credibility. A good introduction invites your reading audience in. An introduction, more than any other part of an essay, is a chance to be a little bit creative, inspiring, to write dramatically. But beyond all of this, a well-tuned introduction prepares your reader to accept your claim as something worth arguing. So let's begin our discussion. The most common mistake in writing an introduction for an essay is forgetting who your audience is. So let's do a quick review of who exactly it is we're writing for. The most important thing to remember about your audience, the audience for a formal academic essay, is that they are not your teacher. You're not writing for me. Students who get in the habit of writing with teacher as audience often forget to be as comprehensive with their introduction as they would be. They figure, well, the teacher knows the book we're writing about. The teacher knows where I'm going. I'm just going to skip all the introductory matter and get right to the point. And that way, we get introductions like this one. Imagine an essay starting off in this fashion. The most important contrasting characters are. Your reader is going to ask, which characters? What book? What's our topic? What are we talking about? Where are we going? And so if you remember that your audience is not your teacher, then it will help remind you that you've got to do more to prepare them for your claim. Secondly, your audience does not know you. They don't know the class, and they don't know the assignment. I always imagine that my audience is in West Virginia or Vermont or Hawaii or Nevada or Arizona, and they have no idea what this piece of paper is that they're picking up, and so I've got to very carefully guide them into understanding what they're reading. Finally, your audience has read the book. Thus, you don't need to do any lengthy summarizing for them, but they read it a year ago. And so they will need occasional help, occasional bits and pieces of reminders to understand your argument as you're making it. Next, let's review the basic structure of the introduction for a formal academic paper. I like to imagine an introduction as a sort of upside-down triangle. This reminds me that I'm going to start off my discussion very generally and then work my way down to being very specific And this most specific moment at the point of our upside-down triangle is what we call our claim, or what some people call a thesis, or a thesis statement. And so the introduction can generally be divided up into three major parts. The first part is where we speak generally, and often we're not speaking directly about the text that we're interpreting. It's possible that you could begin with the text, but you don't have to. And then the second part, that's where we get our reader into the text itself. And finally, we work our way down to our specific claim. So let's take a look at an actual introduction for the novel The City of Ember, and let's see if we can break it down into its three general parts. Here's the beginning of an essay entitled The Tiny Spark of Truth, subtitled Moral Courage in De Prou's City of Ember. So as we recall, the first part of the essay is very general in nature. It doesn't necessarily talk about the book, but it's going to prepare our readers to hear about it. So here's how it goes. Perhaps it is an inborn trait, or perhaps it is the result of education in moral courage, but some people are able to face the truth much better than others. Philosophers have struggled for millennia with that most painful and incontrovertible fact. We are born to live short, brutish lives, only to die with very little to show for it all. Most people find ways to hide from this difficult truth. Some erase their conscious minds with alcohol or drugs or crime. Others immerse themselves in dull, witless entertainments. Still others buy their way through the pain, hoping that the latest fashion or the newest car will allow them to forget. So you can clearly see in this first part of the essay that I am speaking generally about the idea of hiding oneself away from the truth. I haven't yet gotten to the City of Ember, but I am preparing my reader, and those of you who've read the novel can clearly hear many of the characters in the novel behind these examples. The mayor is the clearest example of someone who has stolen and bought his way through his life in order to hide from the pain of the truth. Then, the introduction continues. In Jean Duprou's 2003 novel, The City of Ember, based loosely on Plato's allegory of the cave, the survivors of an unknown disaster live in an underground cave sheltering them from the above-ground destruction. However, the citizens of Ember, like the citizens of Plato's cave, were brought in as babies, and they do not know that their city is a part of a larger world. And although their supplies are dwindling and infrastructures crumbling, most Emberites are too self-absorbed and too frightened to admit that their city is falling apart. So you can see in this second part here that I've introduced the City of Ember. I've done a little bit of background reminder to help my audience. Remember, my audience has read the book, but it's been a while. So I give them a little bit of help, and I prepare them to hear my last two sentences, the first of which you'll see is a sort of bridge to my claim, and then finally my claim itself. The mayor of the city is the worst of those with their heads in the sand, and only a very few, Lena and Dune chief amongst them, are brave enough to stand up to him. The City of Ember is an allegory for how a tiny spark of truth can bring light into even the darkest of lies and denial. So there it is. There's my very specific claim. That right there in red is the promise that I am making to my readers. I promise you, dear reader, that the rest of my essay is going to be dedicated to arguing this point. And so again, you see the clear upside-down triangle. Beginning at the top here, very generally, and working my way smoothly and progressively, sentence by sentence, closer and closer and closer to my most specific claim about the novel. The real trick to this method of introduction writing is planning ahead. So let's take a look at this same introduction without my marks, and I'll describe for you the planning ahead necessary to do what I've done here. I know some writers who sit down, fire up their computer, get a blank screen, and just start writing right here at the beginning. But that is not the best and most efficient, and certainly not the most stylish way to go. And so here's what I do. I start every essay I write by first developing my claim. Everything starts with the claim. Once I have my claim, at the very least, I'll write a good outline, and sometimes I'll go even further and begin my actual body of the essay. But I don't start writing the top of the triangle. I don't start writing this top part of the triangle until I've got everything set up. If I start writing my introduction before I start writing my essay, I might end up using quotations, ideas, or facts in my introduction that I want to save until later. So the key is claim first. And once we have the claim, then I'll show you how that empowers us to write the rest of the introduction. Once I have my claim, I know that the topics, the general topics of my essay are going to be this idea of a tiny spark of truth, this idea of bringing light into darkness, this idea of lies and denial. And so then I can take any or all of these ideas and use them as my starting point. And you can see that's precisely what I've done in this first sentence. Some people are able to face the truth much better than others. I took this idea of truth out of my claim and spoke about it generally here at the beginning. Down here at the bottom, I'm speaking about the tiny spark of truth in the context of the city of Ember. But up here at the top, I'm talking about the truth in a general philosophical context. And then once I introduce this notion of facing the truth, then I expand on that general idea. I talk about how people have long talked about some of the painful truths that we have to face and how it is that we deal with them. And I expand upon that idea until I'm finally ready to introduce the city of Ember itself. But even then, I'm still speaking generally. I spend a little time with the background of the novel. I do a little general reminder of what happens in the novel, all the way working myself closer and closer to getting at this idea of truth. And then finally, at a certain point, I am specific enough where I'm ready to talk about this notion of hiding from the truth in the context of the city of Ember, and that gets me to the point of my claim. So it's really all about reverse planning. Claim first, outline, and then introduction. So that concludes the well-tuned introduction beginner lesson. You can go on and look at the advanced lesson if you'd like another look at a more complicated introduction.